cities also. So tonight we're looking at lesson 34 out of the study guide. Jesus heals a leper and creates much excitement. That's the heading of the lesson. This comes from Matthew chapter 8, verses 2 through 4, Mark chapter 1, verses 40 through 45, and Luke 5, verses 12 through 16. So this is one of those things that all of the gospel writers, the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, deal with. Not everything is covered by all three. As we come into the lesson this evening, we begin reading from Luke chapter 5 and verse 12, and we will supplement that along the way with other passages. And it says, "It came to pass while he was in one of the cities, behold, there came to him a leper." Now, this is an interesting situation in and of itself. Leprosy was something that caused an individual to be separated out of society. Luke records that he was full of leprosy, and when he saw Jesus beseeching him and kneeling down to him and saying to him, he fell on his face, worshiping him. The various forms of this besought him, saying unto him, "Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean." And being moved with compassion, he stretched forth his hand and touched him, and said unto him, saying, "I will be thou made clean." And straightway his leprosy departed from him, and he was cleansed, and he was made clean. And he strictly charged him to tell no man, and straightway sent him out. And Jesus said unto him, "See thou tell no man, say nothing to any man, but go and show thyself to the priest, and offer for thy cleansing according as Moses commanded, the things which the gift that Moses commanded for testimony unto them," that is the leaders, and begin. But he went out and began to publish it much and to spread abroad the matter. But so much more went abroad the report concerning him, and great multitudes came together to hear and to be healed of him of their infirmities, insomuch that Jesus could no more openly enter into a city. Now we're going to, and so we're told, and as this section closes, that he withdrew himself into the deserts or the deserted areas because it was difficult for him to be in the cities because of the multitudes and the number of people who were assembling wherever he went. And we'll discuss that a little bit as we go along. I believe it was last week, Brother Guy, was discussing the fact that, Jesus told many people not to publish or discuss or tell people, but to go their way. And in this particular case with the leper, he was encouraged to go and offer the sacrifice, the obligations that were under the law of Moses. There were many things that could cause difficulties in people's lives. At that time, accidents left many people crippled, blind, deaf, various birth defects. Birth defects are nothing new. Birth defects leave people from their childhood. Later on, we'll see that Jesus healed a man who was born blind. And so from childhood, the various childhood sicknesses and things that come along that leave their marks. There are just a lot of people who would be willing to stand in line to find Jesus and seek him out. As more and more people became aware of the various miracles which he was doing. And so last week we talked about the fact that he had left Capernaum and he was touring through or going through the cities of Galilee, preaching and teaching in their synagogues. And as he come into one of the cities, we're told that he was met by a leper. Now, out of all the things that people can suffer and all the things that they can go through with, most of those individuals were subject to the compassion and the care of others. People who were unable to walk, there were those who would lift up their bed and carry them or move them. We see that during Jesus' ministry. People who are blind got assistance and help. Just a lot of these crippling things, you have compassion. What happens if you have leprosy? Again, there's a reason.
Is it an outward disease?
It's an outward disease, and they were considered to be unclean under the law of Moses. Now, again, being born blind, people can have compassion on you. Suffering an accident, people have compassion on you. As we said, just whatever it is, the woman who met with Jesus, who had the issue of blood for all those years, she'd been to many physicians, and all of them had tried to heal her, but to no avail. But a leper is an outcast. And really the only people that you could get compassion from was another leper. A leper was not prohibited from being with another leper. But since it was deemed to be unclean, even going from place to place, traveling, if you were approaching someone else, you had to announce the fact that you were a leper and that you were unclean, and you had to keep yourself at a distance and warn others. And so it's a difficult thing to have what we think of today as a handicap or disability and to suffer through that. But, this is one of those diseases that left people, and we hear a lot about leper colonies. Sometimes in dealing with the lepers and leprosy, many communities established the colony so that people could go there that had the disease. And again, they could rely or work with each other and support one another in their various needs. But pretty much you were on your own, yes?
It's not contagious, is it? Is it contagious?
Well, that's a debatable thing, and Brother McGarvey mentions here the fact that there is still a lot of discussion over what exactly biblical leprosy was. There is a form of leprosy which is kind of either disease, germ-borne. I'm really not sure, how, again, it's transmitted. But there is that causes people's fingers to fall off and their nose to fall off and their ears to fall off because it affects their circulatory system. And so the outward areas of their bodies, the circulation is trying to protect the core of the body. And so it slowly pulls the blood circulation back into the main part. And the cost of that for many is their nose, their ears, fingers, feet. What exactly that is, I'm not sure. That's generally what today we think of as leprosy. There is a
to me, I think of it in biblical days as people that had scabs on them and they weren't pretty to look at, for one.
Well, again, here in his statement, he says that there were at least two things that could have been, and the two of them may both have been seen as leprosy. One of them is psoriasis.
Yeah.
You know, psoriasis creates, again, you can look at the side of my face and you can see, again, it's very red. The skin becomes dry and it peels, white flaky skin. And other people have it on their arms, and it's more prominent.
Be like skin cancer we got today or something like that.
Well, if it was psoriasis, it's just psoriasis. But again, psoriasis produces blisters. Sometimes you'll see those who have severe psoriasis, there is a blister. It's a watery blister. And so that has sort of an oozing to it. Yes.
I worked with a boy when I was in Florida that when he would get real bad, he would have to absolutely cover himself up even to work because he couldn't stand for the sun to even get near it.
Yeah. It is, I mean, if it's the psoriasis part, again, I have it on my face and I have lots of problems every time I get out in the sun. It just causes more problems. And there are other things that affect it, but the sun is one of those. The other is elephantitis. That's, again, another causes swelling and misshapen limbs and fingers and all of that. Plus the leprosy that, again, people think of today, where in India and other places that had leper colonies, they have some specific medicines for that form of leprosy. And so it's kind of hard to, some people had it in a rather light effect, and we can, again, if you want to, again, study it more deeply, there's lots of different verses and things that he references here. But for some, it actually goes to the point where they're literally white from head to toe, where the pigments in their skin and all have been plagued by that. Psoriasis, I think it mentions here, there's a white psoriasis, there's a reddish psoriasis and a mixture of those. Some creates a depression in the skin, some cause flaky skin. The question is, psoriasis per se is not contagious. It's generally it's some kind of inherited problem. It can be caused, I suppose, by many different things. But again, if that's the case, I don't believe either psoriasis or elephantitis, either one of those, that are necessarily contagious. And that brings up a question about biblical leprosy. Were they really contagious, or did God use that as a way of, again, warning people and using it as a symbol of sin and the effects that sin had on the body, the outward effects that these various diseases had? And so there is, like I said, a lot of discussion by biblical scholars as to, what this leprosy per se was. But nonetheless, those who had it were, again, unclean. And when you think about it, there's lots of temporary things. If someone handled a dead body, they were unclean for, I think, 7 days. Well, again, you were unclean for 7 days, you washed, and then you could return back to people and to interacting. And so, in that sense, there were a lot of different things that were unclean that one wanted to abstain from. But leprosy is one of those that you could, according to the scriptures, be healed from it. And you have some of those references here. And that's what Jesus is making reference to when he tells this man to go and offer the gift prescribed by Moses. And part of that was he had to show himself to the priests. In the law of Moses, the priests were taught how to identify leprosy and how to declare one to be clean, what they were looking for as to being clean or be cleansed from leprosy. And so, I'll leave that. There literally could be at least 3 different things that were all interpreted or could be interpreted as leprosy at the time of the Old Testament under the law of Moses. And, this primarily, again, applied to the children of Israel. If I'm Greek, nobody cares. And so that's another thing in the discussion of leprosy. There is the one that we think of today as leprosy that people think of as perhaps being contagious. But, as a whole, many of these things were deemed to just be skin irritations or skin problems and were dealt with. But under the law of Moses, it was a matter of being clean or unclean. And so that takes us back to one of the questions Brother McGarvey raises. Was it something that God did to distinguish, to help the children of Israel to make distinctions between things? Just like food. There were foods which were clean and there were foods which were unclean. Shrimp, unclean. Crawdads, unclean. Catfish, unclean. Now that pretty much messes most of us up. Some people don't like those, but again, pork, bacon, unclean. And so was that a distinction food-wise? Was there really something wrong with pork? Is there something really wrong with catfish? Is there something really wrong with lobster and again, some of these other things? And there's much discussion about that, but in reality, it appears that God was just trying to teach the children of Israel to make distinctions between things that were clean, things which were unclean, and thus to be better prepared to make a distinction between things that were sin and things that were not sin. But sadly, the branding of one as being a leper had a long-term effect. It wasn't a short-term thing. Now, when the Jews went out into the marketplace and they were in places where they interacted with Gentiles to even a limited degree, they felt that they were unclean, and so they would go home and wash, and thus they would be clean. And that's where we get the hand washing that we see in the scriptures, trying to purge ourselves from the unclean affairs of the world. But that again has nothing to do with an infection. You touching a Gentile is not necessarily going to give you some kind of disease. And so this is where we get into that discussion that Brother McGarvey has here as to whether or not it actually was a contagious disease at the time, or it was merely something that had long-term effects that was clearly identifiable, and God used that to, in a certain way, teach us how, a man who has leprosy is unclean, and everybody wants to stay away from him, right? Well, that kind of symbolizes what happens with God. When we are unclean or defiled by sin, God does not want us in His presence, and He does not actively pursue. And so God can't be tempted with sin, neither tempteth He any man. So God the Father distanced Himself from fallen mankind. Now He has worked for us through the agency of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. And so there is that aspect of leprosy as something that represents the way in which God views and feels about us. Isaiah 59, 1 and 2 says, the Lord's hand is not shortened that He cannot save, neither is His ear heavy that He cannot hear, but our sins, our iniquities, they have separated us from God, and He will not hear. And it's a lot the same way with leprosy. It's not that I can't do something for you or that I can't reach out and interact with you. It's that I choose not to because you're unclean. And that uncleanness represents the concept or the idea of sin. And so this man was full of leprosy. He wasn't just a little spot of something here, but he was full of leprosy. Luke makes a note of that. Luke is a physician, so as a physician and a Jewish physician, he would have been able himself to distinguish leprosy and understand the implications of that, both medically and from a Jewish perspective at the same time. And when this man sees Jesus, we're told that he comes begging, pleading, kneeling down, actually bowing. Matthew says worshiped him, which is the idea of laying down flat on the ground, humbling yourself before him, and said unto him, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And so I don't know if this man had heard from others whom Jesus had cleansed, or heard of others that he had cleansed, or if he just knew through the things that Jesus had been doing, that if he truly wanted to and willed, surely a man who's capable of doing all the great things that he has, his reputation, these signs, wonders that he has been doing, he most certainly could cleanse him from the leprosy. And so it could be considered a part of faith by that man, and also knowledge of the reputation of Jesus and the things that were going on. Does anybody have any questions or comments down through that? Now, here in Mark, in verse 41, it says, and being moved with compassion, he stretched forth his hand and touched him. I want you to think for just a moment the horror of that moment. Now, whether he has been healing lepers and they've seen him before, others who had not would have separated themselves away from the leper. Some would have been troubled just the fact that he approached them. And there were no doubt many who were there trying to follow Jesus and get his attention. I don't think this man was the only one based on what we're reading and seeing here. But, he doesn't touch Jesus. There's rules. There's kind of rules that you have to follow. And so he doesn't touch Jesus, but he comes before him. He bows down. He literally humbles himself on the ground. And he speaks to Jesus saying, "If thou wilt, thou canst make me clean." And he stretches forth his hand and he touched him. This is one of those big no-nos. You just don't do this. And so he stretched forth his hand, and we're told he touched him and said unto him, "I will, be thou clean." And straightway the leprosy departed from him. That is, he was cleansed and he was made clean. Now, this says he was full of leprosy, which would imply that his whole body was probably covered in whatever condition or situation that he was experiencing. And, Luke here says the leprosy departed from him. Now, for a doctor, that would be an interesting thing, that Jesus touched him and the leprosy departed from him. Luke, being a doctor, having no doubt seen or have dealt with lepers before, takes interest in this. Now, Matthew and Mark both speak of that, but again, Luke says that he was, it had departed him, it had completely left him. And so that's not something that just goes away. I've been to many doctors and we've discussed all of that and we've done many things, and I still am like I am. And so,
reckon paralysis was with that too?
Again, depending on the extent and what it did, if it was kind of in the area of elephantitis, that it had a debilitating kind of situation. Now, like I said, the leprosy that we think of today, where people's feet come off and their toes, it starts usually with their toes and their ears and their tips of their nose, and it continues on to where they lose their feet, they lose their hands, and so it's a very slow, torturous kind of process, and in that sense it would be very crippling. Now, from the looks of this man was able to walk up to Jesus and he was able to bow down before him, so it doesn't, at least on the surface, appear that he had any physical limitations as to what he was capable of doing. And so he tells him, he charges him, he strictly charged him. He was, it wasn't one of those just passing thing. He seems like from what we have here that, he made it clear that he didn't want him to be talking to other people. And straightway we're told that he sent him out and told him again to talk to no one about that, but go and show thyself to the priest and offer for the cleansing according as Moses commanded, the things which, and the gift which Moses commanded to be offered. And so even if one was cleansed of leprosy, and even if one believed that they were cured, even if you have someone like Luke, who is a physician, you come to him and say, Dr. Luke, I've had leprosy, and for the last few months things have been getting better, and I don't see anything anywhere. I think I'm cured. And if Dr. Luke took a look at you and said, yes, I do believe that there is no leprosy to be found in you. Under the law of Moses, you still, even with the doctor's decree that you had been healed or the leprosy had left, you couldn't just go wandering back into society as if nothing ever happened. Primary reason for that being, of course, people who might have known you, that's going to cause a problem because, wasn't he a leper? I mean, yesterday he's hollering unclean, he's doing all these things. Today he's right in the middle of the town marketplace. And so there had to be a process whereby in an official capacity, one was deemed to have been cleansed, and a process by which they went through. And so even with Luke saying, it had completely left him, he still had an obligation under the law of Moses to go to the priest, present himself, allow the priest to examine him to see if he met the qualifications of one who had been cured. And if he did meet those qualifications, then there were certain sacrifices, gifts to be offered in thanksgiving to God. And so part of that is, you just don't wander off. If you get healed from leprosy, those things, there is a process. And, the local priest inspected the leper. If he found him cleansed or cured, then there is a discussion in there about the sacrifices, use of 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet, hyssop, whatever, razors, shave their hair, and then a bath or an immersion, probably in the mikveh, the baptistry, not for the forgiveness of sins as we think of us under Christianity, but for that ceremonial cleansing. And so you go through this whole process of the priest looking at it, the priest pronouncing you clean, then the offering up the sacrifices, and then the hair shaved off. Then you go into the mikveh, and so you are spiritually cleansed of that. And so when you come back up, you're ready to go back out into society, and you have met the qualifications. And part of that, the shaving of the head and doing those things left a sign, that something had happened. There were various.
In closing this evening, we wish to thank you again for spending your time in study with us. We hope the lesson has been uplifting and motivational. We encourage you to return again for our next lesson. Until then, may we invite you to visit our website. You will find many study opportunities. Our resource page has links to the Gospel Broadcasting Network, a 24/7 station with many great Christian programs and speakers. In Search of the Lord's Way, with Brother Phil Sanders. We have 2 links for Bibles and downloadable software. If you are looking to really expand your knowledge, perhaps you might like to try World Video Bible School, a college-level learning site free of charge. So, until next time, may God bless and keep you in His care as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the churches of Christ salute you.